Nowhere to Call Home by Cynthia DeFelice, Chapter 20. In the morning, there was more of the same thin, watery gruel and another slice of bread. This time, Frankie leaned over her food and didn't take her eyes off it until she had finished. "Stew pot," she whispered, when they had pushed their plates away. She still felt uneasy speaking with so many ears listening. "What do we do now?" "Any of these stiffs who want to stay gets put to work now," he said, "but you and me are taking off." Frankie was relieved to hear him say they were leaving. She hated the mission, with its close, cramped quarters, foul odors, and air of hopelessness. "But where will we go?" she asked. "Like we said, to Montana." "Stu, do you think—" She paused, not sure how to say what she wanted to ask. "Are you sure?" Stewpot's jaw was set. "I'm sure about one thing, Blue. I ain't staying one more night in this stinking hole. All I know is I gotta move and breathe some fresh air quick." "Stu," said Frankie, "I was thinking last night, and well, I have an aunt who lives in Chicago. We could go there, both of us, and—" "An aunt in Chicago? So that's who you was running from." He paused, then said, "You go." His eyes were serious. "What about you?" Frankie asked. Stewpot smiled at her gently. "I don't think so, Blue. You think your aunt would be happy to see the likes of me at the door?" Frankie faltered. It was a good question. She didn't even know if she would be welcome after she had run away without a word. "She'll like you once she gets to know you," Frankie said, not at all sure this was true. "Look, Blue," said Stewpot, "you know how to act around swells, but me, I ain't suited to it. I'm gonna get me that farm, remember? And in the meantime, I aim to see them mountains." They were quiet for a moment. Then Stewpot said, "You ought to go, Blue. I ain't kiddin'. What do you aim to do, stay on the drag forever?" "How about coming with me, just until you're better?" Frankie begged. "Nah, I'll be fine as soon as I kick this cough. Besides, I came this far. I'm gonna see them Rockies." "Well then, I'm going with you," Frankie declared. That settled the matter for the moment. When Stewpot tried to protest again, she silenced him with a look. She couldn't imagine leaving him now, not when he was sick. When he was well again, then she'd think about what to do next. Maybe after Stewpot saw the mountains, he'd be willing to go to Chicago with her, at least until the hard times were over. "You stay here while I find the main stem and get us some grub for the trip," she said. Stewpot began to protest, but Frankie shushed him with a look. "You think I can't hit the street by myself?" she challenged. When Stewpot hesitated, she pressed her advantage. "While I'm gone, you talk to these stiffs and find out what train we want, and what the situation is with the bulls." "Geez," said Stewpot, "you're getting as bossy as that Vera." But he was grinning when he said it, and Frankie grinned back, feeling an odd pleasure at giving the orders for a change. Frankie found the main section of town without difficulty. Within a couple hours, she had managed to secure 3 loaves of day-old bread, 5 carrots, 3 apples that were just a bit shriveled, and a stick of greasy, spicy salami that didn't smell spoiled at all. When she returned triumphantly to the mission, she found a scowling Stewpot washing dishes. "I was here, so I got stuck pearl diving," he said. "I might as well stay for lunch, seeing as I earned it." Frankie ate a piece of the bread she had begged, while Stewpot had his bowl of watery soup. Then Stewpot turned in his bowl, and they stepped out together into the crisp, cold afternoon. They approached the yard cautiously and watched for a while. Seeing no bulls patrolling, they found an opening in the fence and sneaked through. They walked along the lines of cars, checking waybills until they found a freighter going their way, then climbed inside to wait. When they were settled in, Frankie asked, "What's in Seattle anyway?" "Some guys at the mission said there's a Hooverville there. Said we can stay there as long as we want." "A Hooverville?" Frankie repeated. "What's that?" "You ain't never heard that before?" Stewpot asked. "It's a little town set up by people who got nowhere else to go. There's plenty of 'em all over the country. They're named after our high and mighty president, who don't give a rat's tail about people like us. Folks make shacks out of whatever they can scrounge up, plant themselves, and stick around." "Is it like a jungle?" Frankie asked. "Sorta, only jungles are for guys on the move like us, and cops can come and bust up a jungle. These Hoovervilles get so big that after a while, there ain't nobody dares try and mess with 'em. There's whole families living there, from what I hear, little babies and kids and stuff." Frankie tried to imagine it. "We can take a look anyways. If we don't like it, we'll leave," Stewpot said with a shrug. Then grinning sardonically, he asked, "You know what a Hoover blanket is?" Frankie shook her head. "A newspaper. How about a Hoover flag?" Again, Frankie shook her head. "A guy's empty pockets turned inside out and flapping in the breeze." Stewpot laughed. But Frankie didn't think the jokes were funny. They seemed to her to hide a bitter despair. Did President Hoover know of these towns named after him? And if so, wasn't there something he could do to help the people there? These were new thoughts for Frankie, and they occupied her mind as the train moved north and Stewpot slept. The hours crawled by. They rode for 2 days, traveling through St. Paul and stopping briefly in Fargo. Their food ran out, and by the time they arrived in Grand Forks, Frankie was hungrier than she'd ever been in her life, and colder. Looking out at the bleak, bare, windswept landscape of the North Dakota winter, she experienced a deep foreboding. For a moment she had the frightening sensation that she and Stewpot were the only people left on a cold, indifferent planet. She felt lost, with no sense of where they were. She was almost glad to see a guard patrolling the yard, swinging his nightstick, his breath making big white clouds in the frosty air. When he was out of sight, he and Stewpot jumped down from the boxcar and ran to the safety of an abandoned freight shack. Shaking off her dreary thoughts, Frankie helped Stewpot build a little fire, then said, "I'm going into town for some grub." Stewpot began to rise from his place by the fire. "You stay," said Frankie quickly. "There's no sense in both of us going, and this way you can keep watch on what's happening in the yard." It was a lame excuse, and she and Stewpot both knew it. She held her breath, hoping he would agree to stay where he could rest and stay warm. "Okay, Blue," he said finally. The sun was already beginning to go down, marking the end of the short winter day. As Frankie made her way carefully and stealthily across the yard, Stewpot had said he thought they had a couple of hours before the train would be ready to depart. It was enough time for what she planned to do. Stewpot didn't want her to spend any of her money, telling her to save it for a time when things got rough. She didn't know if he'd agree that this was the time, and she didn't care. Frankie walked until she found a small grocery store. Passing the window, she saw a thin, dirty-faced boy with a tense, pale face, and was startled to realize it was her own reflection. Inside, she bought 2 loaves of bread, 2 quarts of milk, 4 apples, a chunk of cheese, some canned meat, and 4 cans of beans. She piled them on the counter and went back for a can opener and a small tin cooking pot. After paying, she carefully placed the change back inside her shoe, ignoring the staring eyes of the clerk. Carrying the sack of food, she followed the grocer's directions to a dry goods store, where she purchased 2 blankets, 2 wool watch caps, and 2 pairs of wool gloves. Then she went to a drugstore and asked the man behind the counter what medicine he would suggest for a person with a bad cold. The pharmacist asked a few questions, which Frankie answered. Yes, fatigue and weakness. Yes, coughing, congestion, sore throat. Fever? She didn't know. The man turned behind him to the shelves filled with bottles and tins and jars. This should help ease the coughing a bit. And this aspirin can work wonders, especially if your friend gets feverish. But it's no substitute for bed rest, warmth, good hot food, and plenty of liquids. Do you understand? Miserably, Frankie nodded. "How much is the medicine?" she asked. "The small bottle is 49 cents, and the large is 89 cents. "I'll take 2 of the large ones," Frankie said, bending down once again to untie her shoe. "Follow the directions on the label," the man advised. "It'll probably make him sleepy, but that's for the best." When Frankie turned to leave, he said gently, "Good luck to you, son, and your friend." Frankie murmured her thanks and fled before the pharmacist could see the tears that suddenly flooded her eyes. The bags, one heavy and one bulky, slowed her steps, but her thoughts were racing. Would 2 bottles last long enough to get them across the Rocky Mountains to Seattle? Should she have bought 3 bottles instead? Was Hooverville a place where Stewpot could rest and get well? Would there be hot food like the mulligan in the jungle? Would the blankets and the hat and the gloves be enough to keep him warm? She calculated the amount of money she had left, $44.65. She wondered if it was enough to pay for a hospital or a doctor if Stewpot got sicker. She felt sick herself at all the questions for which she had no answers.